Okay, just imagine this for a second. A land literally born from two massive rivers, a people created from a mix of four totally different ancient groups, and a kingdom that wasn't founded by some warlord, but by a vote. This is the incredible and honestly often forgotten story of ancient Bengal.
And, to really get why this history is so important, just think about this number 250 million. That's how many people speak Bengali today. It's one of the top languages on the entire planet. We're talking about a massive global culture with a huge presence everywhere from Kolkata all the way to London.
But where did it all start? I mean, what's the actual origin story of this land and its people? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to dive into right now. So take a look at this. On the left, you've got a map of ancient Bengal, one huge single region. And then on the right, you see the modern reality, the partitioned landscape we know today. It's a really powerful visual, isn't it? It just goes to show that this is a place that's been constantly reshaped, and not just by politics, but by the land itself. Okay, so if you really want to understand Bengal, you've got to start with the geography. You have to start with the land. And that story, well, it all begins with two absolutely colossal rivers.
And when I say the land is a child of these rivers, I'm not being poetic. That's literally what happened. For thousands of years, the Ganga and the Brahmaputra have been carrying all this silt down from the Himalayas and just dropping it. They literally built the Bengal Delta piece by piece, right out of the sea. The land itself is basically a gift from these rivers.
And wow, what a gift it turned out to be. All that silt created this incredibly fertile plain. I mean, for centuries, travelers who came here were just blown away by how wealthy and productive it was. You had the famous explorer Ibn Battuta in the 14th century calling it a land with abundance. And later on, merchants started calling it the granary of the East. Pretty amazing, right? All right, so we've talked about the land. Now let's talk about the people. And, it's funny, if the land was a product of these two big rivers merging together, the people, well, they were kind of the same. So who exactly were the first Bengalis? Now, this is a really important point to grasp. There's no single, simple origin story here. The historical sources are super clear on this. The Bengali people are a conglomerate, basically a fusion of a bunch of different groups who all sort of blended together over many, many centuries. And we can actually trace this fusion back to four main groups, or streams, if you will. First, you had the original settlers, the Austric people. Then came waves of Dravidian peoples up from the south. You also had Mongolian tribes coming in from the northeast. And then finally, a later, smaller migration of Indo-Aryan speakers from the west. And it's this incredible, complex mix that eventually formed the Bengali people. But of course, history is never that simple. This land of plenty and its newly formed people were about to face a really, really terrible crisis. See, after the great ancient empires of India collapsed, Bengal just fell apart. It plunged into a dark and truly chaotic age. With no one in charge, no central government, the whole region just fractured into tiny pieces. You had local warlords fighting each other for scraps of territory. Foreign invaders looked at the situation and saw a golden opportunity. And for about 100 years, it was just complete and utter chaos. Ancient Sanskrit political texts actually had a perfect, really powerful name for this kind of situation. They called it Matsya Nyaya. It literally means the law of the fishes. Think about it. In a pond where there's no master, what happens? The big fish just eat the small fish. And that, right there, was ancient Bengal. So, faced with this endless cycle of violence and instability, the people of Bengal came up with a solution. And for its time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. And this is the really wild part of the story. They didn't just sit around and wait for some foreign conqueror to show up and impose order. And they didn't just pick the strongest, most brutal warlord and rally behind him. No, they decided to create a king themselves. Yeah, let that sink in for a minute. We're talking around the year 750 AD. The various chieftains and local leaders, basically representing the will of the people, all got together and chose their own king. This wasn't about some divine right to rule, and it wasn't about conquest. It was, for all intents and purposes, a social contract. The man they chose was a chieftain named Gopal, and his mandate, was super simple: end the law of the fishes. And you know what? He did it. He managed to unify all those warring groups, he set up a central government, and he founded the Pala dynasty, which would become the very first great homegrown empire to come out of Bengal. And this, right here, is where the story truly takes off. Because with the peace that Gopal established, his kids and grandkids, his successors, they took Bengal from being this chaotic backwater and turned it into an imperial superpower. Under emperors with amazing names like Dharmapala and Devapala, the Pala Empire just exploded in size. For nearly 400 years, they were the dominant power in northern India. I mean, their influence stretched all the way from what is now Pakistan to the borders of Myanmar. That is a massive area.
But the Palas weren't just about conquering territory. Not at all. They were the last great protectors and patrons of Buddhism in India, pouring money into legendary universities like Nalanda. And their reputation was totally international. They had diplomatic ties and trade deals with kingdoms from Tibet all the way to Indonesia. This was, without a doubt, Bengal's golden age.
So when you step back, it's just this incredible story, right? A story of geography, identity, and amazing political innovation. But, and this is the sad part, it's a story that hasn't always been remembered. You know, more than 100 years ago, the great Bengali writer Bankim Chandra Chatterjee wrote something pretty poignant. He worried that his people had become a nation who had forgotten their past. He felt that this foundational history, the story of the Palas, the struggle against the law of the fishes, their unique mixed origins, had just been lost to time. And that really brings us full circle back to today. When you know this history, this story of a land built by rivers, a people forged from many different groups, and a state born not from conquest but from a collective choice to end chaos, how does that change the way we see Bengal and its place in the world? It's a legacy of incredible resilience and innovation, and it's a story that absolutely deserves to be remembered.